What's up everyone, my name is Rosenda, welcome back to my channel, and we are back with another video, and today we are back with another track review, episode number 14, I believe, taking a look at Let Me In by MYRNE and ALLKNIGHT, MYRNE, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, I say MYRNE, but we're taking a look at another track today. We're taking a look at an artist we haven't looked at, MYRNE, another artist that again sometimes comes up on my release radar, but I end up choosing other artists, but MYRNE is definitely an artist I've been wanting to take a look at, to review for a while. He's an artist that I've been really liking recently, and is kind of approaching my top artists of all time, and we're taking a look at a track that's definitely going to be different in a genre, a track that's definitely going to be different than not only in a genre we haven't looked at, but really just a style and a production that we haven't really looked at yet, kind of the character of this track, and specifically the length of the track, which we'll talk about as soon as we get into it. So I'm excited for this video, definitely really excited to check out this artist and this track. Make sure to like and subscribe for more, but without further ado, let's hop into Spotify. All right, we are back in Spotify taking a look at Let Me In by MYRNE and ALLKNIGHT, an artist that I've been wanting to take a look at for a while. Looks like we're at another This Never Happened label, which I think was the Cosmo episode. All This Time, I think, was the track title. This Never Happened, I believe, out of Lane 8's label, which is definitely going to be a little bit more melodic. Now that I think about it, the Cosmo All This Time episode definitely was a little bit more melodic progressive house, but this is definitely a more, at least right now, a traditional melodic house track that we're going to be taking a look at. Before we get into the preface, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to MYRNE and highlight MYRNE, who is an artist that has been approaching one of my favorites of all time. I discovered him in 2019. Obviously, there's not that many tracks of his in this playlist. In my playlist, there's actually I have a melodic house and kind of progressive trance playlist, progressive melodic house, progressive trance playlist that I think he has more appearances in. But I definitely wanted to highlight this artist because he's becoming one of my favorite artists. He makes a lot of really good tracks. I mean, just take a look at this track length on the right. We actually, if you saw episode number 2, we actually looked at star signs already. MYRNE is actually one of the artists, one of the 3 artists in star signs. I already talked about MYRNE. I believe I mentioned MYRNE in one of my other videos. I can't remember if it was a breakdown, but I know I mentioned it because of this track. But you'll see a lot of other tracks in here that I really like. Ignis is one of my favorites. Actually, Afterglows and One Sunrise at a Time are also 2 of my favorites. But the real reason I wanted to highlight this is because I wanted to call attention to Close the Distance, which not only, for a few reasons. Number one, it's one of my favorite tracks of all time. I'm really liking it. I do really like it. I always get really immersed and when I listen to it. But the other reason I want to highlight this is because we're taking a look at MYRNE today. We've talked about artists who have made tracks that I rate highly. I know the Nurko and the Longest Night video. Nurko was one of them. I said that his track Let Me Go was probably a 7 out of 10. I wanted to call attention to this because Close the Distance by MYRNE, take a look at this time, 5:55, is one of my favorite tracks of all time. And I think I was thinking about this earlier, this is probably what an 8.5 looks like to me. I think it's at least an 8. 9 is pushing it. This is probably an 8.5 track. So of artists that we've looked at and tracks they've made, I think MYRNE right now holds the spot for having made one of the highest rated tracks in my opinion. There are probably only a few tracks that I would rate higher than this, and then we'd have to take a look at like Porter Robinson or something like that. But that's why I wanted to call attention to this. In any case, today we're looking at Let Me In by MYRNE, April 14th, 2026, just recently released, 5 minutes and 42 seconds. Again, another thing worth mentioning, this will be the longest track we have looked at. I want to say by far. I'm not sure how long, let's say The Longest Night or To the Moon have been. I think those have been probably over 4 minutes. I'm not sure that we've looked at a 5-minute track yet. And this is closing in on 6, so another reason to be excited. All right, and what are we going to talk about for the preface today? This one's a little bit interesting because we're introducing not necessarily a concept or an idea, but just a perspective and a kind of an experience, a way of taking in tracks that I haven't talked about, that I haven't mentioned, that again is really vague. It's not concrete. I can't quite put it into words, but this being the longest track that we've looked at, I've listened to this track twice. Again, it's really hard to scrutinize and to kind of really understand everything and be completely process how everything works. So what ends up happening when I listen to this ends up being a track that is experienced, at least how I experience it, that I end up experiencing, and I'll just end up saying that is experienced from beginning to end. Some tracks, especially shorter tracks, and especially tracks that have, a little bit, this track has structure to it, but especially tracks that are very almost predictable and very traditional, I'll say, they're a lot easier to take in and be immersed and to scrutinize and kind of see how things work together. When a track is long like this and it's very progressive and melodic and it kind of works with emotions and vocals and builds up and down, I find that as a result, I end up kind of taking this track in as a whole, beginning to end. And instead of being kind of really immersed on what's going on, every beat, every bar, every phrase, you end up just kind of experiencing the track as a whole in almost like a flow state beginning to end. I'll mention a little bit more about that at the end, but this is very reminiscent of what I talked about in my City of Rain track breakdown, which I'll probably kind of tie these two together when we get to the actual rating. But that's definitely one of the effects that this track will have, is at least to me, you kind of take it in as a whole and beginning to end instead of in kind of spurts and in pieces. So let's actually talk about that. And this is going to be probably another one of those track reviews where I don't say much, not only because A, I need to listen to the track and really scrutinize it more, but B, because you take it in as a whole, it's less about the individual parts and more about the track experience and kind of whole beginning to end after the fact, not necessarily how you're experiencing from start to finish, but at the end, how you experienced it while you were listening to it. So why don't we get to actually listening to the track? As a reminder, there will be no audio playing for copyright reasons, but we can all listen to the track at the same time with Let Me In by MYRNE in 3, 2, 1. Very nice atmosphere and crowd effects, I will say. The environment is just really, really nice here. You get that melody already that's going to be playing for basically the entire track. Hold that thought. There we go. Vocals come in. I really like that atmosphere right there. Right away, for some reason, the structure just seems a little bit strange. The vocals follow kind of a certain phrase, and then for the last two bars, it kind of switches up, which isn't unusual out of trance, but you don't get that a lot out of vocals. You get that more of like out of melodies or bass lines or things. Vocal doubles. Again, the whole thing that you kind of gather from this area is just a lower energy area, melody, vocals, atmosphere, all layered, lower melody, but very atmospheric. You get that hook. And again, because it's long and slow, this area kind of stretches out, and you kind of take it in as a whole, as the area as a whole, instead of a little bit more individually. Very good reverses. Kick starts coming in. And again, this whole thing just kind of blends into one large area. What are we at? I mean, we're, a minute and 30 in. Again, I love long tracks. Soft build up into a soft drop. Pretty standard for melodic house. I really like soft drops like this. Of course, it matters where you go after this and how the track progresses. Same melody you've had from the start. Hi-hats come in. Melodic house, a lot of automation cutoffs. Automated cutoffs. Pretty standard. Bigger drop area right here. Now that I'm listening to it the third time, I kind of like this melody. Progression 101. If you saw my most standard form of progression video, this is basically what I talk about. First verse, first section had no drums. You had the drop, and now the kick carries you through the second verse. New vocal melodies too, what it sounds like. It also kind of contributes to what feels like a change in structure, especially with those new melodies. But again, because this area is so dragged out, this kind of feels like a section as a whole, regardless of what the vocals are doing, or regardless of what vocal melodies they're following, regardless of kind of what progression and drum elements you introduce. Like, for example, you got a clap right here. The whole thing kind of stretches out and you feel the progression, but it's less about the individual elements and the changes, because this whole area kind of blends together. In my brain, effectively, all we've had at this point is a first verse, an atmospheric first verse, a drop that starts soft and builds up, and then a second verse that just has a little bit of progression and more movement to it. There's that melody a little bit stronger. So actually hear some new kind of Reese's, sound like Reese's. Now that I'm really scrutinizing it, the production is actually quite nice. Sound design, production, all that stuff. And naturally, the second drop, instead of starting soft, you just go straight into it big, which again kind of blends the whole track together. Vocals come in at the end. Pretty standard arrangement as well, so nothing too different here, especially since it's such a long track. For more information, check out the Nurko Longest Night video. Actually, if anything, check out the Kygo Save My Love video. We're going to talk about this outro too in the rating, and that is Let Me In by MYRNE and ALLKNIGHT. All right, so what is my rating of this track? I was quite immersed there, but there's going to be a few things that I want to mention. I hope this will be a little bit quick because, again, it's just about things as a whole. Starting off with the actual track, not really anything I want to talk about individual elements. I really like the length. I like the melody a little bit more, good production, all that stuff. I definitely want to talk about kind of how we take in this track as a whole, so let's talk about that. So the biggest thing I obviously want to talk about here is how is about the track experience and how it kind of blends together, because I actually think I described it quite well in the listening section, where because things are so long and drawn out, the second verse was a perfect example. In the second verse, the vocal melodies do new things. You introduce, the drum for the kick drum for progression, then the claps come in, and you kind of get a few new elements and some activity in the second verse. But because it's so drawn out, it all kind of starts to blend together. So what does all that mean? What am I referring to when I talk about this experience? What exactly is kind of going on with the track experience here? So this is what I mean by that. Whenever we look at other tracks, I always try to kind of review them as best as I can, maybe from phrase to phrase, see what elements are introduced, see what the vocal is doing in one area versus what it does in the next, how unique it is from area to area, how the track experience is delivered, how the story is told, how it unfolds, how the drops work together, what's done in the first drop, what's done in the second, and kind of all these things and how every single element works together. In this track, because it's very long and all the things I've already mentioned, the areas kind of blend together. So in my brain, when I kind of listen and experience this track, all I really kind of end up experiencing is just the movement and the experience and the progression of the whole thing instead of what's going on in each individual element, right? In my brain, what I experience is a first verse, as I mentioned during the actual listening section, a first verse that has good vocals, it's very atmospheric, an atmospheric first verse with vocals. And then in my brain, all that comes next is a drop that starts soft and then gets big halfway through. A second verse with some progressive elements, a little bit more going for it, a little bit more movement, and a second drop that just is completely full. And then the track ends. That's really all I can kind of gather from this track. Not gather, but that's all that kind of I experience in hindsight after having listened to this track. And it's really, really, again, these are all vague, concrete criteria that I've talked about. I do think that hurts the track a little bit because sometimes you have to take into consideration, when things are drawn out and slow, and how the experience comes across, how the listener ends up experiencing it. I think this is comparable to, as I mentioned earlier, my track City of Rain. If you saw the track breakdown or maybe even the discography, I can't remember which one, I kind of talked about that, about the track, about my track City of Rain, about how the whole thing is kind of taken in as a whole. And to be clear, I didn't really mean that as a good thing. It's not a bad thing inherently, but I kind of didn't like that. I think the track had a lot more room to be creative and for a little bit better storytelling is the word I've used in the past on how elements are introduced when they're taken away, how the narrative and the story unfolds, instead of just kind of really flowing from area to area, giving you a holistic picture of the track, or not necessarily holistic, but a kind of a grand view of the track, almost like a big picture of the track, instead of how each individual element is kind of taken and what's introduced and when it's introduced. Because City of Rain has some good switch ups, not a lot, but some good switch ups. But because it's mostly simple and it's mostly linear, like this track is, you end up just kind of experiencing in hindsight. And it actually, to be fair, it actually works in City of Rain's favor, because probably in the breakdown I mentioned how there's less effects in kind of the middle section. If there were effects, then you end up scrutinizing the track a little bit more, and then you find that it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And City of Rain kind of doesn't hold up to scrutiny. But when you kind of take a step back and look at it as a whole, it's kind of a little bit nicer because it goes up and down in all these places. But when you really scrutinize it, it's not as exciting as I think it could or should be. And that's really what happens with this track. Not the excitement part, but the fact that because everything's so long and drawn out, which again I really like, you end up actually kind of taking a step back and not being able to scrutinize it or appreciate the things that you could appreciate if you were able to scrutinize it. Where in this track, it might harm it a little bit more. It does actually in this track, it's a little bit neutral because again, if you scrutinize it, maybe I don't really think it holds up to scrutiny. I mean, I've been immersed completely twice listening to it now, and you know, it's a lot of the same. That's melodic house, right? It's going to be a lot of the same. That's progressive tracks for you, and I love progressive tracks. But I also wanted to mention that I also think that there are tracks that are long and drawn out and progress from area to area that are interesting and that do hold up to scrutiny, and that you can be kind of you can take a step back and enjoy the big picture, but you can also enjoy it when you're scrutinizing it and when you're completely immersed. Close the Distance is a perfect example of that. Long, slow, drawn out, but even when you're immersed, it kind of holds up to scrutiny. Another good example is probably Concrete Angel by Gareth Emery. It's a trance classic staple. It's very slow and drawn out, but you know, it has some more life to it. And I think that it's a good one that holds up to scrutiny. So again, it's just things like that that affect the track experience. And as I mentioned, I've said it probably 3 times already. I'll say it one more time before we get to the actual rating. These are all things that are hard to explain exactly and to put into words because they're all things that exist in my head. When I listen to the track, when I'm immersed, I feel the story and I feel the track and I feel how things unfold. And I'm trying my best to put it into words. What I've said, it might not perfectly 100% accurately capture, you know, my thoughts and opinions and the experience of this track, but it's the best way I can to explain why I think this track could be good in some regards and why it falls short in other regards. That's the best way I can put it. Because of a bunch of factors that are at play in this track, when I listen to it, I kind of experience it as a whole instead of in the moment and scrutinizing it, and I think that hurts the track more than it helps. That's all I'm really trying to say. What the exact mechanisms at hand, I can't really put into words or explain, but that's kind of the outcome and the effect of what's going on. And before I get into the rating, I almost forgot. I did mention I wanted to talk about the outro, which again, there's no outro there. It's a crash outro. One of the things I will give this track credit for, actually, is something that I do a lot. Is the drop ends, and then there's about maybe 8 solid seconds of just the track coming down. And actually, the only reason I draw attention to this is because I wanted to appreciate it a little bit. It's something I like to do a lot in my tracks. All my tracks are meant to be listened, not all, but most of my tracks are meant to be listened to fully immersed. So I always enjoy leaving a long stretch of kind of the track coming down after the last note and sound of the track, just so the track can really breathe and the listener isn't scrambling to pause it before the next track comes on. If you're completely immersed and then all of a sudden shuffle comes on and the next track just kind of breaks you out of the zone, I like that. That's something I do a lot in my tracks. To let the track have a lot of breathing room after the track actually ends and the last note is played. This track does the same thing. It's one of the things I like about this track. Small detail, but it's also one of the reasons that I'm not going to dock points for not having an outro. The track is long enough. An outro isn't necessary. The track already comes down. It doesn't come down more with an outro, so it does kind of come down sharply, but because it's so long, it doesn't come down like this. It comes down, a little bit more linearly over a longer course of time. So just one thing I wanted to just draw attention to there. But in any case, let's get to my final rating. So Let Me In by MYRNE. What would I rate this track? That's probably the 3rd video in a row, I think, where I forgot to actually think about the rating. The other ones I kind of had a number in my head. Here I have no number in my head. So now I actually need to take time to think about it, not just confirm what I thought was the case. Here I actually need to think about a number. So give me 30 seconds. Okay, this is tough. This is tough, rough, and unfair, but I'll have to stick by my original criteria that I don't want to lose touch of. I think we just end up giving this track a 5. I don't think this track is interesting enough to give it above a 5. And I need to remind you guys, but more importantly, remind myself that a 5 at the end of the day is not a bad rating. Does this track feel a little bit more average? Kind of. I think this track has nice elements. It's above average in the sense that, hey, I love long tracks. It's a little bit more emotional. It has that progression for it. But it's not as interesting as I think it could be, and it's not as interesting as you would want out of 6. And at the end of the day, a 5, as I said before, is not a bad rating. I mean, you're looking at, again, that's why it's important to, and now that I think about it, that's why it's important to have some semblance of understanding about how you rate tracks. Because now that I think about it, this track might fit into the realm of, what else have we given a 5? Deepest Veils, this track is probably as good as Deepest Veils. I like both of those tracks, but that's why I think it was very necessary to be strict about the criteria and be able to recognize that songs like Save My Love and Wilderness by Midas might fall down to that 4, because those tracks aren't bad at all. But, you know, I do think that this track does not belong with those tracks. This track probably does belong with things like Deepest Veils. What's another one? I mean, the other Starships track, but that's probably not a good example. Even like I think Jai Wolf, Nothing Left to Lose was also placed at a 5. And again, this is probably where this track belongs. You know, it has good elements. It has, you know, it has good things going for it. It does good things. But I do think that what I said earlier is fair, that this track isn't interesting enough for me to give it a 6. And I need to remind myself that a 5 is still a good rating. And it is. A 5 is an average track. This is recently I think I've been getting trapped in average meaning a bad thing, but I need to remind myself that in an objective world, an average is not a bad thing. So this probably is right where it belongs. Now that I've refreshed my memory on that, I don't think I'd change any of my ratings though. I mean, again, even something like All the Time by John Summit was definitely felt like more of an average track, but it was pretty creative and I was kind of bobbing my head. And then what was the other one? What did we just look at? Hurricane is probably fine. And what did we just look at? We looked at Blank's track, Colder, which I think is probably right where it belongs as well. It's growing on me. But again, I think that's where it belongs. So yeah, I don't think I've rated anything outside of the criteria. I'm glad we had this track to kind of ground me a little bit more and remind myself that 5 is not a bad rating. And again, it probably falls perfectly in line with things like, again, Deepest Veils and Nothing Left to Lose. Good tracks that I like, tracks that are good, but just not interesting enough to kind of put it at that 6. So I think that's a very fair rating. I had to think about it a little bit, but I'm not unsatisfied with that rating. I think it's fair. I think it's where it belongs. I like elements of this track. I like that it's long. Longest track we've looked at is absolutely awesome. But for all the reasons I mentioned, because kind of you can't really be immersed in it or scrutinize it as much, and you kind of end up taking it as a whole and just kind of all the areas blend together. I think a 5 is probably where you want to be, so we'll leave it at that. Let Me In by MYRNE, 5 out of 10. All right, and that is about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Let me know what you think about this track and what you would rate it. This is the first melodic house track we've looked at, if you count Casbo All the Time. Actually, I don't know what I gave that track. That's probably a good thing to check. Did I give All the Time a 6? I might have given it a 6. It's a little bit more interesting, but that's not the point. The point is, let me know what you would rate this track. Again, it's the first melodic house track we've looked at, and I'm still new-ish to the melodic house genre. I've said before that when I'm new to genres, I tend to kind of think more highly of them because it's new and I don't have references to compare them to, but I'm still new-ish, maybe just like a year or 2 on melodic house. So you guys can let me know what you think. Let me know how this compares to other melodic house tracks. I've listened to enough of it that I kind of, I can objectively analyze these things to be firm on my rating. But again, that's the point of this channel and the comments, for us to discuss our criteria, to discuss what we think about this track, to discuss elements. Let me know if what I said about the experience makes sense, if you take this track in as a whole and kind of look at it beginning to end, or if you're able to scrutinize it a little bit more and see if it holds up to scrutiny, you know, with the melody changes and the vocal changes and all that stuff. Let me know any other thoughts you guys have about what I said, especially when it comes down to things like track experiences and all that stuff. But remember, I want this channel to be a place of discussion, so make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.